Imagine waking up on a quiet Sunday morning, and within less than 2 hours, the course of history changes forever. On December 7, 1941, the sky over Hawaii was calm and blue. Sailors were talking on the decks of their ships. Some pilots were still drinking their morning coffee. At Pearl Harbor, the largest American naval base in the Pacific, moved slowly through a peaceful Sunday routine. No one there knew that thousands of miles away, something massive was already in motion. A Japanese strike force was moving silently across the Pacific Ocean, carefully planned, heavily armed, and carrying a single mission: destroy the American fleet in one devastating blow. And when the first aircraft appeared on the horizon, it was already too late. Explosions began tearing through the sky. Torpedoes slammed into battleships. Armor-piercing bombs ripped through steel decks. Within minutes, Pearl Harbor was no longer a naval base. It was a battlefield. But this story isn't just about a surprise attack. It's about how a moment of shock can awaken an entire nation, and how that morning began the journey that would transform the United States into the decisive power of World War II. Every great story follows an ancient pattern: the hero's journey. There is a peaceful beginning, then an unexpected challenge, a moment of darkness, and finally a rise stronger than before. Pearl Harbor was exactly that moment, the day an entire country was pushed into its own hero's journey. In the early 1940s, the United States was still trying to stay out of the war, raging across Europe and Asia. The memory of World War I was still fresh, and many Americans believed the country should avoid another global conflict. But across the Pacific, Japan was expanding rapidly. Its military had invaded China and moved into strategic territories across Asia. The empire was determined to control resources, shipping routes, and regional power. There was only one problem: Japan desperately needed oil, and much of that oil came from the United States. When Washington imposed economic sanctions and cut off oil exports, the consequences were immediate. Without fuel, Japan's Navy and Air Force would eventually grind to a halt. Inside Japan's military leadership, a dramatic decision was made. If war with the United States was unavoidable, it had to begin with a crushing blow. The architect of this strategy was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He understood America better than many of his peers. He had studied in the United States and knew the enormous industrial power of the country. Yamamoto believed that in a long war, Japan could not win. So the plan had to be bold. Strike first, destroy the American Pacific Fleet, and buy time for Japan to secure an empire across Southeast Asia before the United States could recover. The chosen target was Pearl Harbor, a powerful naval base, but one that many believed was far from the front lines of the war. For months, Japanese pilots trained relentlessly for the mission. Engineers redesigned torpedoes so they could work in the shallow waters of the harbor. Special bombs were developed to penetrate the thick steel armor of American battleships. Then in late November 1941, the largest carrier strike force ever assembled at that time quietly left Japan. 6 aircraft carriers led the fleet. More than 350 aircraft were prepared for the attack. The Pacific Ocean remained calm. No alarms were raised until the morning of December 7th. At 7:48 a.m., the silence was shattered by the roar of aircraft engines. The first wave of Japanese planes appeared over the island of Oahu. Seconds later, the bombs began to fall. One of the first catastrophic hits struck the battleship USS Arizona. A bomb pierced the deck and detonated the ship's ammunition magazine. The explosion was so powerful that the entire vessel erupted into a massive fireball. More than 1,000 sailors were killed instantly. Around the harbor, other ships were hit in rapid succession. Torpedoes raced through the water toward the battleships anchored along what was known as Battleship Row. USS Oklahoma rolled over after multiple torpedo hits. USS West Virginia slowly sank into the harbor. USS California was heavily damaged. Meanwhile, Japanese fighters and dive bombers attacked American airfields, destroying aircraft before they even had a chance to take off. Within minutes, Pearl Harbor was engulfed in smoke and flames. Yet even in the middle of chaos, extraordinary acts of courage began to appear. Sailors rushed to anti-aircraft guns that had never been meant to fire under such conditions. Damage control crews fought desperately to keep burning ships afloat. Some American pilots managed to scramble into the air and engage the attackers. This was the darkest moment of the journey. The moment when the hero appears defeated. When the attack finally ended, the destruction was staggering. 4 battleships sunk, 4 more severely damaged. Nearly 200 American aircraft destroyed. More than 2,400 people killed. For Japan, it looked like a stunning victory. But one critical detail would change the entire course of the war. The most important weapons of modern naval warfare, American aircraft carriers, were not in Pearl Harbor that day. They were at sea. That single fact meant the United States still had the power to fight back. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress. His words would echo through history. He called December the 7th, a date which will live in infamy. And then he asked Congress to declare war. The response was immediate, nearly unanimous. The United States was now fully engaged in World War II. The attack that was meant to break American resolve had done the exact opposite. It awakened a giant. In the months that followed, American industry mobilized on a scale the world had never seen before. Shipyards began launching new warships at incredible speed. Aircraft factories worked day and night. Millions of Americans joined the armed forces. Across the Pacific, a long and brutal war unfolded. Battles like Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippines slowly shifted the balance of power. 4 years after the attack, the Japanese empire that seemed unstoppable in 1941 had collapsed. Pearl Harbor had been the call to the journey, the moment a nation was forced into the fight, but it was also the beginning of the path that would eventually end the war. Because sometimes history changes quietly, and sometimes it explodes on a Sunday morning. If you're someone who remembers the stories your parents or grandparents told about World War II, if you value the real history behind the headlines, then make sure to follow this channel. Here we explore the moments that shaped the modern world, the battles, the decisions, and the people whose courage changed history. Subscribe and join us for the next story.